Aurora City Council wants to question its police leadership about what happened over the weekend as riot officers moved into Municipal Center Park and dispersed a crowd with pepper spray as people were listening to a violin vigil in memory of Elijah McClain, who died following a struggle with Aurora Police. Our Steve Stager wanted to question the mayor about that after it was seen around the world on social media. So Steve, conversation with Aurora's mayor, how'd that go?
Well, it didn't happen, Kyle. I kind of got one of these. More on that in just a minute. But after much pushing today from reporters and members of the public, Aurora Police tell us that they will release body camera clips from this weekend showing the protesters who prompted that kind of response. Interim Police Chief Vanessa Wilson has accused Antifa of stirring things up. Wilson told us late this afternoon that the department's intelligence unit discovered Antifa was going to be at the rally. She said she shared a photo with us of a protester holding an Antifa flag, which she said was also used as a weapon, claiming that a protester jammed it into one of her officers' chests along the line. Wilson also told us that officers were trying to protect protesters who were listening to a violin vigil on the lawn there. She says protesters pelting her officers with rocks along a fence that had been torn down when the department made that call to move in and that the situation was unsafe.
All day long, there was no issue for 7.5 hours. And then it became to the point where they dictated what was going to happen. When we were pushing the line just to take our fence back, people started pelting my officers with rocks. And at that point, we had to meet that resistance with what we were getting thrown at us and my officers were being hit with.
Aurora City Councilman Juan Marcano, an advocate for police reform, was at that protest all day, and he says he did see a handful of agitators in the crowd, but they tended to be regulated by the peaceful protesters who were there. They would say, "Stop, don't do that. You're going to get the police to respond on us." He told us he was upset by APD's decision to storm that field like they did during the violin concert. He wishes the chief would have reconsidered her decision to have her officers in riot gear in the first place.
It was actually de-escalated best when the chief actually pulled the riot officers back. Because the agitators who are there to cause trouble, if they don't have a target, they get bored and leave. The crowd there wasn't looking to damage anything. They were there to express their First Amendment rights.
Now, you're right. We wanted to try to get a reaction from Mayor Mike Coffman, who has called a special city council meeting tomorrow to have the Aurora City Council question APD. His office canceled on us while we were at the Municipal Center. So we took a stroll on the field and found a few things. Kyle, here is a foam projectile, one of 4 that the department said that they fired this weekend, assuming that it was only 4. And then this, which appears to be a beanbag round, and I'll try not to get it out of the light there. We asked Chief Wilson about this today. She said her officers did have these out there and used them only against protesters who were throwing things at them, but that her officers did use them. We had not heard that until this afternoon.
It's interesting to watch, Steve, sometimes the shifting views of city leaders watching these things. So as we saw in Denver, strong support up and down for how Denver police handled things until the moment that all of a sudden the strong support wasn't there anymore. I mean, that's one of the reasons why you want to talk to Aurora's mayor.
Yeah. Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman on Saturday night tweeted his support for Chief Wilson and the response of the Aurora Police Department. But after 2 days of just taking Twitter comment after Twitter comment and video after video of protesters doing things, the mayor did an about face and is now calling that special meeting and refused to talk to us today because he said he wanted the chief to speak with us first. Our Jordan Chavez talking to the chief right now.
All right. Steve Stager, thank you very much.